She never planned to live on the edge of the world, where wind howls louder than church bells and waves slap the rocks like clockwork. But when you marry a lighthouse keeper, silence becomes your closest friend. Letters arrive months late, storms dance outside your window, and your only neighbor is the sea. This is not just his story, it's hers. And tonight, we step into her quiet, powerful life. The foghorn came before the sun, a low moaning sound, ancient and unhurried, rolled over the dark sea and reached the small weather-worn cottage perched beside the lighthouse. It nudged the windows, swept through the shingles, and crept down into the quiet chamber where Anna lay beneath a heavy wool blanket. Her eyes fluttered open, not with alarm, but with the slow recognition of routine. The horn did not surprise her. It had been the same call, deep and distant, since her very first morning here. She had been the lighthouse keeper's wife for nearly 6 years. And while each day brought its own rhythm, its own breath of wind and cup of silence, the foghorn was always first. It told her what kind of day lay ahead. Grey, wet, lonely. The kind of day where the sea and sky blurred together and the gulls cried out unseen in the mist. She sat up carefully. The wood floor beneath her feet was cold, even in summer, slipping her feet into worn slippers and wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Anna crossed the room and pulled back the heavy curtain. Outside, the world was swallowed in a thick veil. The light tower's top was hidden in the gloom. It blinked faintly, a yellow eye trying to stay awake in the grey. She didn't see her husband yet. Thomas would have been up for hours. On fog days, the work started earlier. Wicks to be trimmed, oil levels checked, the lens wiped clean of sea salt. He moved through the fog like a ghost, always silent, always precise. The beam must keep turning. The horn must keep blowing. The horn must keep blowing. He had said once that every minute the light was dark. A ship could be lost, and so he tended it with a devotion that sometimes frightened her. In the kitchen, Anna filled the kettle with water and set it over the stove. She moved without haste. Time on this bit of land moved differently than anywhere else. There were no clocks that mattered except the tides, and no rush unless the signal bell rang, which it rarely did. Breakfast was a slow process, accompanied by the soft hiss of steam, the creak of wood settling, and the soft coo of the pigeons that nested beneath the eaves. She poured herself a cup of tea and took it to the chair by the window. From here, she could see the faint outline of the path that led up to the lighthouse. It wound around a low hill, vanished behind a cluster of wind-beaten rocks, and reappeared near the iron door of the tower. No sign of Thomas. She wasn't worried. Not really. Just aware. This life, quiet and removed, made one aware of everything. The change in wind direction, the odd silence of birds, the shift of light in the waves. Here, nothing happened suddenly, yet nothing could be ignored. The sea taught you that. With a sigh, Anna reached for her knitting basket. A grey wool shawl lay half done inside. She looped the yarn over her fingers and began to knit. The soft clicking of needles, a companion to the constant low drone of the foghorn. She had started this piece a month ago when the weather turned damp. It was for no one in particular. Perhaps a neighbour's child. Perhaps to be added to the box she sent to town every winter. The foghorn gave another long cry. She paused, listening. The second blast was closer together than usual. Was that Thomas's signal? They had a system. Short pause meant all clear, long pause meant come. Or was she mishearing it? The fog played tricks on the ears. She waited, breath held, but heard nothing more. Setting her knitting aside, Anna stood and slipped on her shawl. She opened the front door and stepped outside. The world was a wall of damp grey. The grass beneath her feet was slick with dew, and the air smelled of salt and seaweed. Somewhere far off, waves slapped against stone. A lone gull circled silently above, its wings vanishing into the sky. Then, footsteps, soft, careful, and approaching from the mist. Anna squinted. A figure emerged, faint at first, then clear. Thomas, in his oilskin coat, lantern in hand. He gave a small wave. "All well," she called. He nodded. "Just heavy fog. Might last all day." She smiled and stepped aside to let him in. He ducked through the doorway, stamping the damp from his boots. The smell of the sea followed him, as it always did. His cheeks were red from the cold, his eyes tired but calm. "I made tea," she said. "Perfect." They settled into the small kitchen. He hung his coat by the fire and took the steaming mug she offered. No more words were needed. This was their rhythm. Quiet, steady, and always beginning with the sound of the foghorn. The fire had long since burned to embers. Outside, the sea murmured its low lullaby against the rocks, and the thick grey of morning had melted into a watery light that filtered through the salt-spotted windows. The fog remained, but it had softened, no longer a wall, but a veil. Anna moved slowly about the cottage, tidying the remains of breakfast, wiping crumbs from the wooden table, and folding the same blue cloth napkins she had used since her wedding day. In a place where nothing arrived quickly and nothing left without purpose, she found comfort in the rituals. Everything had its place, its season, its rhythm. And then there were the letters. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a neat stack of yellowing envelopes, bound with faded twine. Their corners curled from years of damp air, and some bore stains from oil smoke or the accidental splash of tea. She had read them all, dozens of times. Letters from her sister in Boston, from her cousin in Charleston, from Thomas's father, long since passed, and a few, precious and worn, from her own mother, now only a memory. Anna didn't keep them for the news they held. Most were old, outdated, their words long since resolved. Births, illnesses, the price of flour. What she treasured was the ink, the shape of the handwriting, the pauses, the flourishes, the flourishes, the flourishes. The way her mother wrote the word, dearest, with such confidence and care. The way her sister's lines leaned sharply to the left when she was in a hurry, when the loneliness pressed in, as it did on days like these. Anna would untie the twine, unfold one of the letters, and let the voice of someone far away echo into the stillness. Today, she reached for the one with the lavender seal. It had arrived 2 summers ago, folded carefully and scented faintly with something floral. A letter from her childhood friend Eleanor, who had married a tinsmith in Connecticut and now had 4 children and a shop full of polished wares. Eleanor's handwriting danced across the page, full of delight and breathless stories of market days, children's illnesses, and a neighbor's goat that had escaped into the bakery. Anna smiled as she read it again. It was strange, in a way, to feel so connected to someone through ink alone. The last time she'd seen Eleanor was before her wedding, before she had come to this far edge of the country where the ocean swallowed up time. Her eyes drifted to the empty hearth. She imagined Eleanor's home, warm and full of voices, flour dust on the floor, children tugging at aprons, the clang of metal from the back room. How different it must be. How noisy, how alive. And yet, there was a peace here, a kind of sacred quiet. Anna did not envy her friend. She loved Eleanor's stories, but she loved her own silence too, the hush of the sea, the steady tick of the clock that hadn't chimed in years but still ticked, the breathing of the house as it settled into its age. She refolded the letter carefully and returned it to the pile. Later, she would write back. She always did. Her letters were slower, more reflective. She described the light through the fog, the color of the moss on the north stones, the sound of whales in the deep bay. She told Eleanor about the garden and the lighthouse repairs, and the gull who had built a nest inside the weather vane. She never mentioned the ache of missing people. That was understood. Thomas entered quietly. He had been down to the boat shed, inspecting the storm mines. A small coil of rope hung from his belt, and his coat smelled faintly of tar and brine. "More fog coming in," he said, glancing out the window. Anna nodded and tucked the letters back into place. She didn't speak of them. He rarely asked. They both understood that letters were like firelight. They warmed the edges of solitude, but did not chase it away. Instead, she poured 2 cups of tea and handed one to Thomas. They sat together in their worn chairs, the silence between them as gentle and known as breath. The fog crept closer. The sea whispered its endless tale. And the letters, quiet and still, waited for another day. The tower waited in silence. It stood above the cottage like a steadfast sentry, wrapped in sea mist and the chill of mid-morning damp. Its iron railings beaded with dew, and the small panes of glass encircling the lantern room held 100 tiny reflections of the sky, shifting grey and soft white. Anna pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The stone steps were worn smooth with time, each one marked by hundreds, thousands of ascents. Thomas usually handled the tower. It was his station after all, but on mornings like this, when the fog refused to lift and the wind was little more than a breath, Anna liked to climb it herself. The silence was different up here. It wasn't the cozy hush of the cottage, nor the gentle drone of the sea through the shutters. It was something broader, deeper, a stillness that seemed to stretch over the world. She moved slowly, her footsteps muffled against the cool stone. The spiral staircase wound upward past small windows where seagulls sometimes perched and peered in. The smell of salt was stronger here, more direct, more wild. As she neared the top, she paused at the final step. There, in the narrow space just below the lantern room, was a small wooden cabinet where they kept the cleaning cloths and oil for the lamp. The brass components of the Fresnel lens needed frequent tending. Salt air could dull them quickly, and dust, though nearly invisible, always found a way. Anna unlatched the iron door and stepped into the lantern room. The glass surrounding her stretched in every direction, casting a prism of soft light around the chamber. The great lens stood at the center like a polished jewel, its hundreds of crystal ridges catching every shimmer of daylight. Even unlit, it felt alive, like it held secrets in its curves. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a square of linen cloth. With gentle, practiced hands, she began to wipe the lower rim of the lens. It didn't take long. She wasn't here to polish. She was here to listen. Beyond the glass, the ocean rolled in vast, silver swells, and then she heard it, the low, mournful tone of a whale somewhere far out in the bay. It began as a deep hum, barely louder than breath, then rose and fell in waves of sound that felt more like memory than music. A second call answered the first, softer and farther away. The water carried the notes, shaping them into something that echoed through the rocks and into Anna's chest. She froze, her cloth still in hand. The whales were not always near. Sometimes weeks passed without a song, but when they sang, it filled the air like a cathedral bell touring through mist, a hymn from the deep. She rested her hand on the window ledge and closed her eyes. In that moment, Anna was not alone. The tower was a shell, and she was inside it, listening to the sea sing through the bones of the earth. It reminded her of church when she was young, when the organ swelled and the voices rose, and even the walls seemed to breathe. Thomas said the whales only came to feed, that it was something to do with krill and tides and temperature, but Anna believed there was more. She believed they remembered things, that the deep called to them with stories of old wrecks and long-lost shores. And maybe, just maybe, they called to her too. A gull swept past the glass, startling her back to the moment. She smiled. Outside, the fog had begun to thin. The headland showed faint outlines of heather and stone. Somewhere below, the garden would be waking, the beans needing water, the lettuce ready to pick. Anna folded the cloth and placed it neatly back in the cabinet. She didn't need to light the lamp until nightfall, but the tower felt complete now. Acknowledged, cared for. The whales were still singing. She could hear them even as she descended the stairs, their notes softer now, fading into the wide hush. Back at the bottom, she stepped into the yard and stood for a while in the quiet. A breath of wind stirred her hair, and the tower, proud and tall above her, seemed to exhale. The earth was cool beneath Anna's fingertips. She pressed gently into the soil, soft, dark, and damp with the morning's fog, guiding the green tips of a bean sprout into place beside a wooden stake. The mist still lingered across the headland, draping the world in a thin grey veil, but the garden below the lighthouse had already begun to stir. The rows were neat, if a bit uneven in places, and the small fence that framed the garden leaned slightly where the wind had pushed too hard the previous winter. Still, there was order in it, rhythm, a quiet pulse that matched Anna's own. Each plant had its space, each bed had its season. Here, the carrots, there, the onions, a plot of cabbages, a small corner of herbs, sage, thyme, lavender for sleep. Tucked closer to the cottage, shaded by the lighthouse broad shoulder, were the lettuces. Their pale green heads glistened with dew, tightly curled like secrets waiting to unfold. Anna brushed a strand of hair from her cheek and sat back on her heels. From this spot, she could see the gentle slope that led down toward the rocky edge of the bluff. Beyond it, the sea stretched wide and silver. The waves moved slowly now, their white caps barely creasing the surface as they rolled toward distant shores. A gull cried somewhere overhead. A bell clanged softly from a fishing boat farther out in the bay. She reached for the wicker basket beside her and placed a few tender radishes into its center, careful not to bruise their ruby skin. Their spicy scent mingled with the damp earth and salt air, creating a fragrance both fresh and ancient, like spring itself had been bottled and released again. The garden had been her own idea. In the early days, when she and Thomas first moved into the lighthouse keeper's cottage, the headland was mostly wild, grasses, weeds, and low wind-bitten shrubs. But Anna had brought seeds from the village: beans, onions, peas, and squash. She planted them in rows as the waves crashed below, not knowing if anything would take root in such a lonely place. But they had. Year after year, through storm and drought, the garden had grown. The soil was thin, but it was enough. A small movement at the far end of the garden caught her eye. A rabbit, soft, grey, and round, nibbled shyly at the edge of the turnip patch. Anna smiled. She didn't mind. There was always enough for sharing. From the kitchen window, she could hear the faint clink of dishes. Thomas had likely returned from tending the fog bell and was warming the tea kettle. He'd ask about the radishes. He liked them with a little salt, sliced thin on bread with butter. Anna stood slowly, brushing her hands against her apron. The garden's rhythm had seeped into her bones. Steady, grounding, like the tide's pull against the shore. She carried the basket to the edge of the bluff and looked out toward the grey horizon. This high, the breeze was stronger. It played with her sleeves and whispered around her collar. Somewhere out on the sea, a whale exhaled, its breath rising like a ghost above the surface. She held the basket closer to her chest and closed her eyes. In the hush, the sea spoke in lullabies, and beneath her feet, the garden, quiet and steadfast. They listened. By late afternoon, the sky over the sea had turned a hazy shade of gold. The light softened everything it touched, the stones of the cottage, the swaying grasses, and even the rolling waves below the bluff. Inside the lighthouse keeper's home, Anna wiped her hands on her apron and opened a small cast-iron oven. The scent of warm bread filled the kitchen. She reached in carefully and lifted out the loaf, a round, crusty boule she had kneaded by hand earlier that day while Thomas tended the oil in the lighthouse lamp. Its browned top was lightly dusted with flour, and a soft crackling sound whispered from its crust as it cooled on the wooden board. Baking had always calmed her. There was something comforting in the way flour, water, salt and thyme could come together to form something so nourishing. Each step had its rhythm, stirring, kneading, waiting. The rising dough beside the window, warmed by the afternoon sun. And now, the baking, its heat a cozy hum. That pushed back the chill that crept in from the sea. Anna placed a cloth over the bread and moved to light the oil lamp that hung on the kitchen wall. The match hissed softly, and the flame flickered to life, casting long shadows across the cottage's stone walls. Soon, the sun would set, and the world outside would shift. In the lighthouse above, the great lens would begin its sweep, sending arcs of light across the waves to keep sailors safe from the rocky coast. But down here, in the little home nestled beside it, life took on a different rhythm, quieter. Slower. Steeped in routine, Anna set 2 plates on the table, each with a small wedge of cheese. She reached for the butter crock, then carved thick slices from the still warm bread, steam rising from its soft interior. "Smells like a feast," Thomas said from the doorway, his voice low and familiar. His boot was draped over one arm, his boots damp from the grass. "It's just what we have," Anna replied with a smile, placing the last slice on his plate. They sat together in the glow of the lamp, their shoulders close, the world beyond the windows growing darker by the minute. The bread, eaten slowly with butter and salt, tasted of grain and home. The apples had been stewed earlier in the week with cinnamon and a touch of honey from the comb kept in the pantry. As they ate, they spoke in low voices of the weather, the fishing boats, a letter from Thomas' sister that had arrived 2 weeks late. And when their meal was finished, Anna brought out a small beeswax candle and placed it in the center of the table. Its flame was steadier than the oil lamp, softer somehow, and its scent faintly sweet. The kitchen settled into silence. The only sounds were the slow creak of the lighthouse stair above them and the distant rhythm of the waves. Anna folded a piece of linen over the leftover bread and set it aside. She ran a hand along the tabletop, feeling its worn wood under her palm, smoothed by years of quiet meals and the press of elbows during long conversations. She reached for her knitting. Soft wool. Spun from a neighbor's sheep the previous autumn, and let the needles a pair of socks for winter, almost finished. Thomas leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, listening to the wind brush against the shutters. This was the part of the day Anna loved most. The work was done. The sea had quieted. And inside the cottage, warmth lingered in the form of baked bread, candlelight, and the soft presence of someone who knew all your stories without needing them told aloud. By the time the last traces of pink faded from the sky, the only light beyond the cottage came from the tower above. Like a silent sentinel, the lighthouse rotated its great beam across the darkening sea. Steady, sweeping, timeless. Inside the keeper's home, Anna moved quietly, her steps as practiced as the rhythm of the tides. She set the teacups near the hearth and glanced out the window. In the blackness, the light made no sound, but its pulse was as reassuring as a heartbeat. Thomas had already climbed the narrow iron stairway to the lantern room. Every night, just after sunset, he made the slow spiral to the top. There, he trimmed the wick, adjusted the lens, and tended the flame, ensuring that the beacon remained bright enough to pierce even the thickest fog. Sometimes Anna watched him from the base of the tower, his silhouette small against the glass dome, backlit by the glow of the Fresnel lens. But tonight, she stayed inside. The wind had risen. It whistled through the eaves, and the wooden walls creaked gently with each gust. Anna pulled her shawl tighter and added a small piece of driftwood to the hearth fire. The flames crackled with gratitude, casting a warm amber hue across the floorboards. The kitchen, earlier so full of sound and scent, now sat in hushed contentment. This was the hour when time seemed to slow, when Anna felt the stillness of the sea inside herself. There was no rush, no noise, just the knowledge that the night was long, and she would fill it gently. She poured 2 cups of chamomile tea, the steam curling upward like tendrils of memory. The leaves had been gathered from her garden, dried over weeks in bunches hanging by the window. She'd always believed that herbs held on to the summer long after the cold had set in. Anna carried 1 cup to the front room and set it on the table near Thomas' old leather journal. The journal had accompanied them when they moved to the Lighthouse years ago. Its pages held notes about tides, weather patterns, lantern maintenance, and, when space allowed, occasional poems. Thomas never called them that, but Anna could see the rhythm in his words. She picked it up and read an old entry. Fog thick this morning. No sails in sight. Light held steady. Anna's bread rose well. The sea is quieter today. Simple, but honest. She smiled and returned the book to its place. Above her, she could hear the faint echo of boots on the tower stairs. Thomas would check the mechanism again, make sure the oil reservoir was steady, and perhaps pause for a moment to watch the stars. The lighthouse lens rotated with a slow grace, its gearwork carefully wound each evening, a perfect balance of weight and engineering. The lens itself, a marvel of French design, caught the light from a single flame and magnified it across the water for miles. And every night, it did the same thing. Reach out into the unknown, offering safety, warning, guidance. Back in the cottage, Anna picked up her teacup and sat by the window. From this chair, she could see the arc of light sweep across the waves. 1, 2, 3 seconds, then dark, then again. It reminded her of a lullaby, a rhythm that comforted rather than called. And somewhere out on that dark sea, perhaps a sailor glimpsed that very light and breathed easier. She thought of all the nights before this one, and all the nights still to come, always with this quiet responsibility, always with the same soft ritual, bread at dusk, fire in the hearth, the steady beam overhead. Thomas returned a little while later, the wind tugging at his coat, his cheeks red from the cold. "All is well?" Anna asked. He nodded and removed his boots, setting them near the door. "Light's strong tonight. Visibility's good." She handed him his tea. "I read your journal entry from last November, the one where you mentioned my bread." Thomas chuckled. "That was a good loaf. Sea air helped the rise, I think." They sipped their tea in silence. The fire danced quietly, the wind roamed the cliffs, and the light continued its endless circle. Anna leaned her head against Thomas's shoulder and closed her eyes, warmed by the nearness of him, the heat of the tea, and the hum of the life they had built, illuminated by a flame far above, shining out into the deep, dark sea. The sea, once gentle and glistening under moonlight, had begun to change. It started subtly, waves curling a little higher, wind pressing more firmly against the windows, but Anna felt it. The shift, like an old friend warning her of something unsaid. By morning, the clouds had lowered, not the friendly kind that floated overhead like sheep, but heavy curtains drawn across the sky. The horizon vanished. Sea and sky became one steel-colored wall, the lighthouse beam cutting across it in steady, silent arcs. Anna stood on the porch, apron strings flapping at her waist, watching gulls wheel low over the bluffs. Birds knew things before humans did, and these birds went for food. They were flying for shelter. Inside the kitchen, the copper kettle began to whistle, a sharp sound in the growing hush. She turned back indoors and closed the door with both hands. The wind tugged at her sleeves as if trying to follow her inside. Thomas was already reading the barometer, his brow furrowed. "It's dropping fast," he said quietly. "Storm?" she asked. Even though she knew, he nodded. By nightfall, could be rough. Anna didn't panic, neither did he. They had lived through many gales before. Some mild, some severe, but each one deserved respect, and so the rhythm of the day changed. She sealed the root cellar doors with extra latches. He checked the oil stores and spare wicks. Together, they hauled in more firewood and brought the oilskin coats down from their hooks. Windows were checked, lanterns topped, biscuits baked in batches. The cottage became a ship before a voyage, tied tight, stowed, and braced. By afternoon, the wind had a voice. It howled low through the cliff grass, and then rose to a wailing whistle that chased down the chimneys. The sea beyond the rocks was now a chaos of whitecaps, angry and urgent, crashing against the base of the lighthouse. Still, the light turned. Steady, unshaken. Thomas pulled on his boots and buttoned his coat. He would be in the tower for hours now, keeping the lens dry, ensuring the mechanism didn't seize in the cold damp. Storms tested every cog and screw. "Be careful," Anna said, handing him a small leather pouch. "What's this?" "Dried apple and oat biscuits. You won't come down for supper." He kissed her forehead. "Thank you." Then he was gone, coat flapping like a sail, boots crunching over gravel and wet grass up into the mouth of the storm. Inside, Anna listened to the fury begin. Rain lashed the shutters like thrown gravel. Wind bullied the corners of the house. The sea roared, and the sky answered. But she did not flinch. She lit a lantern in every room, not for light. There was still enough daylight left, but for comfort, for warmth, for presence. She sat at the table and opened Thomas' journal, turning to a blank page. Her handwriting was small and careful. "Storm due by nightfall. Storm due by nightfall." Barometer low, wind from the east, preparing the house. Thomas with the light. Then she paused, listening, not to the storm, but to the silence that threaded through it, the space between gusts, the quiet waiting in the house like breath held in prayer. She looked toward the tower. Its great glass eye blinked through rain and mist, never wavering. Somewhere out there, ships might be wrestling with the tide, counting on that very beam to guide them home or steer them from the rocks. Anna whispered a prayer, not loudly, not with drama, just a gentle word to whatever watched over lighthouses and lonely wives and sailors in distant waters. As night fell, the world outside turned wild and dark. But inside the keeper's cottage, the fire glowed steady, the teapot warmed again, and Anna waited, not with fear, but with resolve. Storms came. The storm deepened into night, like a slow breath drawn inward by the sea. Hours passed with no change in rhythm, only the strengthening howl of the wind and the percussion of rain drumming against the roof like urgent knocks at a door. No one would open. Anna sat quietly beside the fire. The kettle simmered again. The fire hissed where moisture crackled in the wood, and the world beyond the windows had gone completely black, save for one constant, the turning beam of the lighthouse. Every 15 seconds, it swept across the cliffs and the garden, casting long shadows through the cottage shutters. It was like a heartbeat. Steady, necessary, known. Anna could see it even now, just through the narrow seam of the curtain. That pale arc of light, blurred by the downpour, washing over the porch. It was Thomas's rhythm, his voice in the storm. She knew he would not come back down tonight, not while the wind threatened to shake loose the tower's bolts. He would stay, in the upper chamber, wrapped in his coat, tending to the mechanism and wiping condensation from the prisms every few minutes. Alone with the sea. And she would be alone here, below. Anna rose and took a small journal from the drawer. Its pages were thin and smooth, filled with careful loops of writing. This was not the official log that belonged to Thomas. This was hers. A quiet ledger of feelings, prayers, and soft observations, of gulls nesting too early, of a fox by the shed, of dreams she remembered at dawn. She opened to a fresh page and began to write. The wind is from the east. Still, the windows whistle. I lit 3 lanterns tonight and used the good matches. I hope Thomas is warm. The waves are high. I can hear them breaking over the rocks. I said the Lord's Prayer twice. Not for me. For the ships. For those watching this same storm from the dark. She paused and looked toward the kitchen shelf where the old clock ticked. Nearly midnight. She turned her pen sideways and drew a little star beside her last line. Then she rose, took her shawl, and walked to the front door. Outside, the storm greeted her like a living thing. She opened the door only a crack, just wide enough to let in the scent of salt and rain and wild grass flattened by the wind. The porch creaked. The fog bell clanged once from the cliff's edge, distant but solid. She could not see the sea, but she knew it was there, roiling, restless. She folded her hands in front of her and whispered, her lips barely moving, "Keep the light turning, Lord. Keep his hands steady. Keep the ships away from the rocks. Keep the sea from taking too much tonight." It wasn't a grand prayer. It didn't come from a book. It came from rhythm, like the light itself, repeated in dozens of ways over dozens of storms. It had no name but faith. She stood there for a moment longer, the wind licking at her sleeves and the cold, wet air brushing her cheeks. Then she closed the door gently and returned to the fire. Anna did not sleep that night. She sat in the rocker, wrapped in blankets, listening for anything unfamiliar. A new sound in the wind, the shift of wood under stress, the sharp crack of a branch torn loose. But nothing came, only the old sounds, trusted ones. By early morning, the worst had passed. The wind softened into long sighs. The rain grew lazy and distant, and the sea began to hush its crashing into waves that simply touched the cliffs instead of striking them. The sky was still dark, but its tone had lightened just enough to notice. She brewed fresh tea. She added sugar, though she rarely did, just in case Thomas came in early. When the door finally opened and he stepped through, soaked, tired, but still upright, Anna smiled. "Stormkeeper," she said softly. He chuckled and set his soaked coat on the hook. "And your prayer must have worked," he replied, rubbing his hands. "It always does," she said. Eventually, they didn't say much after that. They sat beside the fire, the warmth creeping slowly back into their fingers, the light outside beginning to return. The lighthouse had done its work, and so had she. The storm had passed. The morning arrived not with fanfare, but with a hush, like the world had just exhaled. The sea, still swollen from the night's fury, had drawn back, revealing the glistening bones of the coastline. Rocks slick with brine shimmered in the silver dawn, and ribbons of seaweed clung to the shore like forgotten scarves. Anna opened the front door slowly, blinking into the dim light. The rain had stopped completely. In its place was that peculiar post-storm clarity. Everything felt cleaner, crisper, almost sacred. The air carried the scent of salt, kelp, and earth, and below the bluff, the ocean whispered rather than roared. She stepped out onto the porch, wool shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, boots already laced. The grass, heavy with dew and last night's rain, brushed against her skirt as she made her way down the slope toward the path. Thomas had already gone to inspect the tower again. She saw his silhouette on the parapet, earlier, small and steadfast against the brightening sky. But the cove was hers. Anna took the narrow trail that twisted between the heather and driftwood. Her steps were slow, cautious on the wet stone, but purposeful. She had walked this same path every calm morning for years, after storms, after snow, after days of waiting. It was where she breathed deepest. The cove was a small inlet, carved gently into the cliffs below the lighthouse. Few ever saw it, too remote, too hidden, but it was a treasure trove after a storm. The tide pulled back far enough to reveal pockets of tide pools and shells, stones smoothed by centuries, and sometimes old things, half-sunken crates, tangled rope, shards of ceramic painted with the hint of a forgotten flower. This morning, the cove was a mirror. The sky reflected in its stillness, clouds drifting softly across the surface, as if unsure where sea ended and sky began. Gulls picked delicately along the wet sand. There, calls sharp but not unwelcome. Farther down the beach, a seal barked once before slipping back into deeper water. Anna knelt beside a small pool ringed with barnacles. Inside, tiny fish darted beneath a swaying canopy of green. A starfish clung lazily to a rock, unmoved by her presence. She ran her fingers along the edge of a shell, a deep blue scallop rimmed with white. She held it up to the light and smiled. Another gift. Each tide brought something new. Not always useful, not always beautiful, but always something. It reminded her that the world kept moving, even in the quietest corners, even here, where storms raged and passed unnoticed by the towns and harbors far away. She found a bit of driftwood smooth as bone, a tangle of rope knotted like a forgotten story, and a length of glass, not broken, but melted smooth by years in the current. She gathered her small finds into the apron of her dress and made her way back toward the path. At the top of the hill, she turned to look back once more. The sea, the sand, the scattered treasures, every bit of it felt like a lullaby sung by the ocean. Not just a morning walk, a ritual, a reminder that even after the fiercest night, the morning would come, and it would bring something new. She returned home to find Thomas asleep in the chair by the fire, his boots still wet, his hands folded like he meant to rest only for a moment. Anna set the treasures gently on the table. She placed the shell beside his lantern and the bit of sea glass near his compass. Then she covered him with a blanket, poured herself tea, and settled into the rocker. The lighthouse had held strong, and the cove had whispered, "You're still here." Night had come quietly. No thunder, no wind, no crashing surf, just the hush of the sea exhaling against the rocks, steady as breath. Inside the lighthouse cottage, the oil lamp flickered low. Its golden light danced on the walls, tracing soft shadows across the stone hearth and time-worn floorboards. The air carried the scent of salt and smoke, familiar, comforting. It was the smell of home. Anna sat by the fire in her rocking chair, a soft quilt draped across her lap, her knitting resting beside her in a woven basket. She hadn't moved much since Thomas had gone back up to the lantern room, his final check of the night. The keeper's light had to shine, outside, The beam cut through the darkness in long, slow sweeps. It turned like a metronome for the ocean, a steady rhythm marking safe passage in an unpredictable world. The house was still, not silent but deeply quiet. The crackle of the fire, the creak of an old chair, the occasional low sigh of the wind through the shutters. Hannah leaned her head back and let her eyes close for a moment. In the lull of the evening, her mind drifted, not to worry or to-do lists, but to softer things. She thought of her garden, the way the mint would stretch out come spring. She pictured the shell she'd found that morning, blue and ridged, resting now on the mantel beside a bit of driftwood shaped like a bird's wing. A simple shrine of things the sea had given. She smiled. There was peace in routine, in weathering storms and finding shells, in lighting lamps and baking bread. Life didn't have to be loud to be meaningful. Sometimes the quiet was where it all lived. Thomas returned just before midnight, boots damp, eyes tired. He didn't speak at first, just set his lantern down and poured water into the kettle. The ritual required no conversation. Anna opened her eyes and said softly, "Is she holding?" "She's steady," he replied. "Sky's clearing too. Stars are out." He handed her a warm mug and settled beside her in the second chair. They sat for a while, sipping slowly, staring at the flames. Then Anna asked, "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" Thomas turned toward her, surprised, but not alarmed. "No," he said after a moment. "Not really. It's quiet here. We belong to it, in a way." She nodded. "I feel that too. Like even if we were to go, the sea would keep calling us back." They fell into silence again, but this time it felt full, like the end of a favorite story. Anna reached into her basket and took out a small bundle of sea-smoothed wood. She had been collecting it over the past few months, each piece chosen for its shape and grain. Together, the pieces formed a little cottage, no bigger than a teacup. She placed it on the windowsill where the moonlight touched its edges. A driftwood home within a real one. "I think I'll call it the dream house," she said softly. Thomas smiled, pulled the blanket up over his knees, and leaned back. "Good a name as any." Outside, the stars blinked quietly overhead. The light continued its slow, purposeful turn. And in the little cottage perched on the cliffs, where time seemed slower and life was shaped by tides and wind, two souls rested in the stillness they had come to cherish. Tomorrow would come, as it always did, but tonight was for Driftwood and Dreams.